So the more that you feel good inside of you and the more that you're passionate about what you do, the more invigoration that you have, and those good feelings, that's how you really tap into the God within.
Mm. Jake, thank you very much for being here on this podcast. I thought we could perhaps first begin with your near-death experience, which you had at such a young age, at the age of 3, I think.
Yes, no, thank you, Aslam, for having me, as an honored guest. Been corresponding and, finally we're here.
Yeah.
But yeah, for listeners who aren't familiar with me, I had a near-death experience at a very young age. I mean, a lot of near-death experiences are usually later in life, and mine, is in rare company, just the age that I had, which I'm sure we'll get into, some of my thoughts and feelings on that or some questions you may have on it. But September of 1993, at just the age of 3 years old,
Yeah.
I had my NDE, and I had it due to suffocation that was spurred on by whooping cough, otherwise known as, pertussis. And I went to a playground and I just climbed up to a ladder onto a playground. And in the last rung of the ladder, I just totally suffocated. There was nothing to hold on to or to breathe for. And it was the scariest moment of my life. And then moments later, just all parts of my body, including my brain, just were shut down and, non-functioning. And the last thing that I just felt and became aware of was my own brain. And I was aware of my brain and my body. And I just saw that my brain literally, and I felt and saw it just snap in half. And once my brain cracked open, that's when the spirit realm just opened up and exploded. And I crossed over to the other side and had my NDE. My NDE was profound in that I was able to experience God, my, spirit guides, angels, awareness of who I am, not only in this lifetime, but before this lifetime, and why, some of the insights into life purpose, why I'm here, what are some of the things that I'm here for, the blueprints, so to speak. Um, was able to encounter my soul family members, and just so much more. So, my NDE was profound, but at the same time, it was a doorway to a familiar place in the depths of my own being and all of our beings. And so it's something that sticks with me each and every day, some days stronger than others, but it's been there for all of my life, for some degree or another.
Yes. So you say that during your NDE you connected to God, but the God you connected to was totally different from the God you were taught by your family.
Right,
And most of us, and you say this in your book too, that we are taught an interpretation of God with human characteristics, a God who punishes, a God who
right.
judges, a God who wants us to obey, and a God who has chosen ones, who prefers one creed or one tribe over another. But this is not at all the God that you experienced or you met with during your near-death experience, is what I
Yeah.
understand.
Well, I think most of God is the outer God or the God that we're taught or that we grew up. And most of this, this God is, mostly just kind of fear-based, it's based off of conditions. If we do something, then we're loved. And, it becomes almost kind of like a game and winning the game, so to speak. But many times it's, the abusive parent that we've had, and that's portrayed in our own belief systems as a parent that will love us for what we do rather than who we are. And in my NDE, I could have a firsthand attestment that the outer God, in many organized belief systems is very much, totally opposite or very incongruent, with the inner God that I had in my NDE. Um, the inner God that I had in my NDE is beyond anything of this world. And by that I mean most of us are not used to being loved for who we are. From a very early age, we grow up, we're loved, but then at a certain point, it's we're not this, we're not that. We need to do this. We need to get bigger, better, all that stuff to become, that. And all this develops into this ego, which ego, could be referenced as edging God out or edging, the perfection within ourselves. out. And, that is developed with time. And so many of us develop this conditional love that we have towards ourselves, onto God. It's hard to say what comes first, the chicken or the egg. You know, is it because we have a conditional love in God that we, conditionally love ourselves, or that do we conditionally understand love for ourselves so that we can't really understand an unconditional or be open to an unconditional God, unconditional loving God? And the God that I saw didn't look down on me in judgment. It looked up to me, in love and acceptance. And this is congruent with the majority of true end-ears who cross over.
Yeah.
And this includes end-ears who were atheistic and end-ears who grew up in, the Islamic faith, the Jewish faith. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter what faith you have, whatever you experience in your prior life to your NDE usually has nothing to do with what you experience in your NDE. That to me gives validity to these experiences.
Yes. You also say, or at least you write in your book, that during your near death experience, you were in the presence or you encountered Jesus Christ, or sort of the energy frequency of Jesus Christ.
Hmm.
And it's interesting because you had an Orthodox Jewish upbringing. So how come do you think it is that it is the energy or the energy signature of Jesus Christ that you encountered during your NDE? Why do you, or what does Jesus Christ symbolize to
Well,
you, perhaps also?
I would say most Jews have more in common than Jesus than Christians, because
Yeah.
Jesus was a Middle Eastern progressive rabbi and he was Jewish. So if you are Jewish, you have more in common. The issue, at least for my faith, what happened with Jesus' name, was just the degree of persecution, that Jews faced, but also having to do, with the death and torture, of Jesus from the Sanhedrin and, the Jewish faith and stuff like that. But what I'll say this, in many near-death experiencers, they'll see like a physical presentation of Jesus, himself, coming to them. I didn't have that in my NDE. It was a lot deeper than that. I think all of us have forms that we could use or vehicles that we could use or presentations of ourselves. Shakespeare, I think his birthday is coming up, but he would speak of life as kind of like a theater or a play of life. And that's kind of like a reflection on reincarnation. We take on these many different hats and facades and roles, but beyond all these actors and actresses is a consciousness of ourselves. And so for myself, I wasn't just looking at superficial portrayal that Jesus would show to others. It was a deeper consciousness, of Jesus, itself. And so I think that's to me, the closest way I could describe that was the soul of Jesus, not so much the representation of Jesus, you know. And that's kind of what I saw. But it just was to me, I'm not, I think we all are a part of God, right? We're all collective peace, but I'm not here to say that Jesus was the sole son of God. We're all the son and daughters of God. So, I'm not necessarily here to say that, but it was a very high vibrational frequency on the other side. And just, when you think of the other side, you think of frequency, and there's lower densities of it, and there's higher densities of it. And the Christ consciousness vibration was an incredibly high vibratory field that I had that was quite familiar, cathartic, comforting, warm, enveloping, that I had, when I crossed over.
Yes, yes. No, but this is, as I said earlier, I mean, I wish the entire world knew this, that God is, or, is not an authoritarian father figure up in the sky who wants us to eat a certain way, pray at
Right.
certain times, pray a certain way at certain times of the day, fast a certain way, go on pilgrimage a certain way to a certain place, but it's really sort of unconditional love,
Right.
actually, that you
Well,
experience.
I'll throw a Greek word at you, right? It's an English, the English word, but it comes from a Greek word. The word is enthusiasm.
Oh, yes.
And enthusiasm, if I'm not mistaken, comes from the Greek word entheos,
Yes.
which means the God within.
Yeah.
And so the more that you feel good inside of you and the more that you're passionate about what you do, the more invigoration that you have, and those good feelings, that's how you really tap into the God within. It
I
is
love that.
through, feeling love within, feeling joy within, feeling passion and zest. that is the inner God within ourselves. And within our lives, that's really what it's about, is finding joy, finding beauty, finding meaning. And when you do that, you see and know God. The key is in religions, it's the total opposite of that. It's almost kind of like you have to be tortured and just go through, all of this abuse and labor and hard work to find God. And God could be found in all places, and maybe some people in religions do that. So you can do that, but it's not necessarily a requirement, nor is it the most productive way, to have God. It's kind of like going on a roller coaster and waiting 5 hours to get on the ride and sweating and then going on it. You don't have to sweat to do that. You could go within on the journey within to experience that ride.
Yeah. So when you do something you really absolutely love, you're actually in touch with that sort of with God or the inner divine or
100%.
yeah.
And that there's many degrees of love, and that's what life is about really deepening those levels of love. And
Yeah.
obviously, Greek philosophy gets into some of those degrees and rungs on the ladder of love, with no pun intended to my book, the Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder. But I found that God is the closest thing to love with an infinite degree of it. There's no limit to the love that God is. In our world, we're used to it. There's like almost like a max of that love, where
Yeah.
you get married, you have kids, and that's kind of it. Like God, there's no ending to it.
Yeah. But so that then sort of begets the question, because, and I speak here to a certain extent from my own experience in life, because for years I forced myself, when I was in my early 20s and such, I forced myself to, I think many people can identify with this. They go to university, they study, I don't know, if not economics, then engineering, if not engineering, then law, but not actually something they truly enjoy, because we're in a world where if you want to, be financially sort of, successful, do well in life, then, you have to have a career that leads to some sort of a corporate job, or most of us, I mean, not all of us, but especially sort of people born in the 80s, I think. I mean, the last 10 years you hear a lot about, living your life on purpose or stepping into your purpose. But when I was growing up, you didn't hear that so much,
Hmm.
actually. Sort of the word purpose, even, you wouldn't hear that so much. So many people, they find themselves sort of stuck in jobs today, so, sort of corporations, but they don't really enjoy it. But how can we know then, if you were to step out of that, if you were to stop forcing yourself to do something you actually really don't enjoy, and instead devoted your life force, energy, and time to something you really do enjoy, and feel that enthusiasm,
Mm.
and theos, how do you know that life will support you? Is there a guarantee, or is it just a matter of taking, sort of that leap of faith, or
Right.
um,
I think what you're describing is a midlife crisis that a lot of
yeah.
people have, and you don't need to be midlife to have that. But a midlife crisis is you've done every step, you've checked off every box of what life told you would bring you happiness, and you're still, leaving feeling empty, and so people have that. And I think what's important, and I struggle with this myself, but I try to apply this, and that's a part of being human, is being honest, being vulnerable, but also understanding where you're coming from in life. Most people operate from fear, fear that if I leave this, that life won't work, or fear that if I leave this thing, you know, um, oftentimes the devil that is what we go to instead of the devil that we don't know. And so I think what's important is this understanding that, and many old souls do this, where they'd rather do something that they're familiar with, or even though they're miserable with, and rather than having that leap of faith. But that is what life is all about, is surrendering at times, listening to those crises at times, those wake-up calls at times that say, hey, we're doing everything, we're not miserable, we're just not, on track with ourselves in our life. And that it's okay to pivot. Worst comes to worst, we're back at square one, but at least we could look in the mirror and try it. And my birthday twin coming up in a couple of days, Shirley MacLaine wrote a book called Out on a Limb, but really it was based off of a message that she got from a channeler that said, in order to get to the fruit of the tree, you must go out on a limb. And sometimes, to have this reward, you have to be able to just be free. And I look at the existential midlife crisis as no different than the NDE that I had in a way, where, I was suffocating and suffering and holding on to that for a period. But once I let go of that and surrendered myself, to a higher power, was when I experienced beauty. And again, so the devil that we know versus the devil that we don't know, and being vulnerable to just say no. And that could be involved in a relationship. You could be with a beautiful person, but they just may not be right for you. And it doesn't have to be anything catastrophic that tells you that this isn't right for me and I can move on. And that's about owning our life, not settling and not doing stuff. But yeah, a lot of old souls are people pleasers and they would rather kind of stick with the same stuff. And you know, I think we have to listen to sometimes our pain, because our pain could really shape in our own purpose and transformation.
Yeah. What I love is that in your book, you say that when you were on the other side, you had a glimpse of your future, that if you were to return to this realm and continue this life,
Mm,
you had a glimpse of what your future would look like and what you would be doing. And what I love is you say that on the other side, you weren't in the process of morphing into your future. You were already a teacher and a guide and a sage. Here on the earth plane, you had to connect into that knowing of your true nature. And you also say that your near-death experience taught you that you were already there within your mission as a soul. Back on the earth plane, you had to put faith and trust in your visions, dreams, and destiny over limited, restrictive, and short sighted limitations influenced by fear.
mm,
And this is actually, where we speak about the law of attraction and the power of thoughts and the power of intention. We hear a lot about the law of attraction, but it's one thing to hear about the law of attraction from someone who's read The Secret and who might be sort of, I don't know, law of attraction coach, but quite another to hear from someone who's had a profound spiritual experience as you did.
mm.
I don't know, what do you think about the law of attraction, the power of intention, the power of thoughts? Is it as simple as sort of having an intention, visualizing it, and then taking inspired action? Or because there's also that sort of life mission or purpose, there's also pre-birth planning. What would your views sort of on all of that be?
Well, I don't think necessarily you attract what you think or want. Many times you attract who you are and what's inside of you. And the more in touch that you are with those depths inside of you, the more that you'll become and attract. I think there are flaws where sometimes, things have destiny or blueprints. For instance, my ancestors in the Holocaust, they just think terrible things and all of a sudden, deserve to be tortured. No, I mean, some of those things were just a part of the life path, and their missions as souls, so, and not, sometimes we have this blueprint in life. And so the law of attraction isn't always in congruence with our blueprint in life. No matter what we can think or do, we have a path. And so we might deviate from that for a couple of years but eventually our purpose and our lessons and our path will be there, maybe just in a different way. But I think maybe the law of attraction speaks to our, deepest and highest good within ourselves and that North Star within ourselves. Um, and the more in alignment that we are with that, the more that we could attract that. You can't achieve if you don't believe. If you don't believe in something, you can't achieve it. So I think the more that we tap into that goodness within ourselves, the more that will bring it to us. But not only that, it have you found that people could experience two different worlds while seeing the same thing? And so much of it has to do with what we're tapping into. Very little life has to do with what's happening on the outside. Majority of it has to do with what's happening on the inside. So law of attraction is connecting to the most you know, abundant energy in the world, which is ourselves. We are infinite, we are eternal, and the more that we're able to connect with that true infinite and eternal selves, the more that we'll be in touch with reality and the more expanded it will be. Because many times we view as reality is not. We point to the body and see that's reality, but you take the body and put it down to the smallest microcosm, it's almost nothing. So, what we view as something bigger, quantum as the body, is really basically nothing, so that's something to think about.
Yeah. How do you tap into sort of that divine self? How do you connect with the other side? How do you, having had your NDE, you say in your book that in moments of intense trauma and distress, those beings on the other side, your spirit guides, guardian angels, your soul family members, um, so in life, you say in life's crossroads, when you felt stuck, you allowed spirit to take over and assist you in making decisions that were not from the limited vision of your mind, but from the unlimited vision of your soul.
Mhm.
How does one do that? What do you have?
Right. Well, it's funny. I made a post on my Facebook page just yesterday, and every day I have like daily insights or reflections. And so the post that I made was, many times people, when they want to make a decision, they'll say, I want to be alone or with my own thoughts. And in reality, we're never alone, first of all. We're always connected, but our thoughts are rarely our own. Usually, our thoughts, what we think are of our own thoughts, if we surrender to them, are usually, hints of guidances and messages from the other side. So we're rarely doing our own thinking when we get quiet. And so I think what's important is to understand, you know, our own thoughts versus being able to receive thoughts and be able to download information, guidance, and just kind of hints from the other side, and being open to that possibility. The brain does not always have to be regurgitory or what we think or just thinking our things through all the time. Sometimes we could process a lot more by just receiving. We get information versus, constantly going through this wheel and recycling, our own thoughts and our own perception versus expanding what we are seeing in the moment and to open us up to different solutions for our predicaments. And so I think it's trusting the mind, which is kind of like a parachute. It only works when it's open, and then it could really rise above to really download some of those information. I kind of look at it like the radio. Many times we're just kind of tuning into our own obsessive thoughts, but on the radio we could tune it up a couple dials more and we could get some of that grace and wisdom and information that we could utilize, in our predicaments in our lives. But it's about being open. And that's not something that we're used to. We're used to, right? In life we have to look in a book or we have to think things in our own we have to do things all on our own, and I think that's why a lot of people get stuck or they feel heavy is they're trying to do things on alone, and it doesn't have to be.
Yeah, I think what it is though for many people, it's sort of a struggle to know, okay, is this my own sort of, mind chatter, my own mind, or is this really divinely, is this really my soul speaking? So
Right.
it's hard to distinguish between those two types of thoughts.
It is. But the more that you practice this, the more you can get in touch with this. I know when I get quiet, it's like a doorway that opens and this peaceful wind that comes through, and just this, this information or this guidance that comes through that I know isn't just from my own doing. I could feel, that degree of guidance. But with practice, you're able to really fine tune and different, make difference. Because majority of our thinking is very neurotic based. It's very fear based. It's very focused on the worst outcome, of a situation. And when you're connecting to the infinite, it blows that off the roof and it shows you things that you would not even dream to be a possibility,
Yeah,
because many times the mind is linear in its nature. It just sees what we've experienced and it's very limited. And when you're tapping into the unlimited mind, it sees infinite possibilities and infinite solutions that we couldn't think through our own selves. So
yeah.
most of our thought process is based off our experiences. It doesn't expand that box that we have experienced life through.
Yeah. But tapping into that infinite mind, your path is meditation, is what I understand? Or how do you tap into the infinite mind?
I I would say to not be at war with our own thoughts, to recognize them as just what they are, just as the ocean has ocean waves, the sun has a sun. Our own thoughts will do their thing, but it's important to not absorb every thought, but to observe them and take a step back in developing some space between the thinking mind, and the mind that's able to receive, and the receiving mind and the higher mind. But yeah, meditation is, I think, a term that's very overused,
Yeah.
but overused but underused, if that makes sense. And I think what's important is that we don't have to follow a particular curriculum or do things, an hour a day to meditate. I just think it's really, to me, meditation is going inward to a degree, getting quiet, going into the depths of our own awareness and consciousness, beyond some of our own fears, beyond some of the surface. But to me, meditation is just going deeper into the ocean of our mind and our souls.
I see. Yeah, is there a specific meditation method that you have, or not really? Just
I mean,
being
for
still.
me, my form of meditation is walking. Um, I'm from New York. We need to move. So for me, when I walk, I'm able to, and it's a specific type of meditation. It's called walking meditation. So I think what's important is meditation separates the being and the doing. Most of the times we're just doing. We're not really connected, in what we are doing. So the meditation is focused on the beingness, being connected, being in the moment. I always say we're not a human doing, we're a human being, and it's
Yeah.
about being, in the moment connected to our multidimensional being. And our multidimensional being isn't just recycled thoughts, it's not just recycled fear. Many times that being is rooted in wisdom and guidance and surrender, in flow readiness, that we could experience in our lives. So I think each person has a unique engine, and I think you have to kind of know thy engine, know how it works, know maybe what doesn't, best serve it. There's all different types of, meditations. There's mindfulness, there's transcendental meditation, uh, there's EFT,
Yeah.
which is the tapping solution. So, even you could even do like a Reiki meditation on yourself. So there's all different types, but for me, walking is good, running is good, and I do a lot of tapping, which
Okay.
tapping I think is great. It helps to really activate um, a lot of the stagnant energies that are within your mind, body, and spirit, and to create more flow within yourself.
Yeah. It's a way to release stuck emotions, maybe, isn't it? The emotional freedom technique.
Right. Yeah, emotional freedom technique is very simple. You just tap on
Yeah.
an area in your body that may feel, dense or heavy, and that could also come with NLP or neuro linguistic programming, where you have like a degree of radical acceptance towards a part of your body that might feel heaviness or stagnant. So for instance, many of my students or clients will learn, like, despite the pain and heaviness, I still love and accept myself, stuff like that. So it's seeing ourselves beyond our pain, and that we have a part of ourselves that is beyond just, tension or pain that within our mind and body, connecting to the real you, so to speak, the you beyond the suffering, the you beyond the illness, the you beyond the pain,
Yeah.
the true identity of ourselves.
Yeah. And also in your book, you speak about during your near-death experience, you realized that in a past lifetime, you took your own life.
Right.
And so you say in your book, and this is quite a sensitive topic, but yeah, I did want to sort of briefly speak about it. You say this so beautifully. You say plenty of people face the wrong direction for the resources of their lives on the outside. The outside world is filled with uncertainty, unpredictability, and suffering, as many are facing the wrong in
Mhm.
their lives. And then you say those who contemplate suicide, they're actually wanting to live.
Right.
Actually, they want to live, but they want to be liberated from the heaviness, the density, the suffering that they experience
Mhm.
in this lifetime. And you remind them that you write in your book that they should not allow the world to influence their souls and minds. Rather, they should allow their souls and minds to influence the world they live in. And the moment that you were able to tap into your purpose or find your purpose was the moment in which the pain and flashbacks of that past life of yours started to go away. But for someone who's struggling with I mean, perhaps this is too. I'm not sure if I should even ask this question because it's such a sensitive topic. But yes, for someone who's really struggling,
Mhm.
how can that heaviness that's weighing on them, that they're burdened with, how can that possibly be lifted?
Right. Well, I think what's important is to also look at the stigma, in the culture that we live in. The language around suicide is commit suicide, like as if you commit a crime. As a mental health professional, I don't look at mental health as differently than physical health. So someone who's dying of cancer doesn't commit cancer, doesn't commit a heart attack. These are things that people experience and struggle with, and at times they, succumb to mental illness. And it's not a weakness and it's not throwing the white flag. At times, it becomes, just gradually unbearable. And, it can get to that point, but it doesn't mean that they're defeated. It doesn't mean that they lost a battle. In many perspectives, we have to see the amount of strength that it took day in and day out to live with their pain. And so, like I said in my book, it's not that oftentimes that they want to die, it's they want to live. They want to alleviate the
Yeah.
degree of pain that they experience day in and day out, and they want help. And so when I see someone who's depressed and maybe they're angry in my office and maybe they're upset, I don't look at that. I see someone who's saying, help me, help me. And that's really what a lot of these people, are looking for. And so I think what's important is to get support. In my book, I have some hotlines, but I think really getting a lot of support, from professionals to not feel this burden or this pain alone. It's kind of like they want to walk this path, but they have all these heavy bricks on them that they're feeling, and it's just too much to carry at a certain point. And I think it's having support systems around them that they don't feel so alone and isolated. Because I think the greatest pain is feeling isolated in your own pain and feeling very alone in your suffering and not feeling a degree of support systems. So I think, if you're able to really utilize, support therapy, and I know for suicide, a good therapy that's really been helpful is something called dialectical behavioral therapy or DBT-based therapy, which is good. But it's important to note that not all suicide is pertaining to a mental health condition. Some suicides could be pertaining to a physical condition, that someone might have, or trauma that people experience. So it's not a one size fit all that leads people to suicidal ideations, plans, means, attempts or, completions of it. It's a very subjective experience that each person has differently. Childhood abuse, is a fact, is a risk. And now, going on, the LGBTQ community are very much at risk, particularly with all these news media outlets that are now using them as bully pulpits to go at particularly the trans community. That's not helpful. So I think getting support and people who understand them and people who are able to, you know, allowing them to be heard and not spoken at or spoken to, I think is helpful.
Yeah, and you create that space actually in your practice for them to be heard. Um, I think oftentimes when we speak to unspeakable, there's something about vocalizing something we don't dare even vocalize perhaps to ourselves. There's
Mm.
something about that that releases emotions. I find stuck emotions, and you create the space for them to do that safely in your practice.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's short term more painful to talk about these things many times, but long term, it does help to alleviate. And that's all a part of the exposure therapy. And sometimes things get a little bit worse before they get better, but at least you're bringing up a lot of that burden to the surface. But I also think it's looking directly at what you're fearing or what, is upsetting you and finding a different way to see it or a different way to process it. For instance, I have a lot of clients of mine with social anxiety. For them, it's comforting for them to stay at home, but actually the anxiety gets worse with more, avoidant behavior. The anxiety increases by going into social situations short term, but long term, it does get better with a different mindset and looking, at people, not being afraid to look at the thing that is causing the trigger of anxiety. Because actually, the thing that we are finding is with social anxiety, it's not so much people, but our own thoughts and belief systems about those people. If we're able to get outside of our own judgments. We recognize that we're the ones that are really causing a lot of this anxiety. And, I think understanding that people will love us, people will hate us, and very little will have to do with us. But I think finding a degree of comfort within our own selves, within our own ability to love and accept ourselves, does well in social situations.
Okay. Yes. Yeah, you also say in your book that many of us were not born into awakened families or school systems that would truly love us unconditionally. And this is true, I think, for many. I mean, it's now for us actually to go through this sort of awakening process and healing process. Yeah, instead,
Yeah, well,
and yeah.
schools are breeding grounds of abuse. I mean, back in the day, they used to talk about how they've gotten better with abuse by not hitting kids with rulers and stuff like that that they used to. But to me, abuse is, loving someone for what they do and, and not loving them for what they are. So it's a very unstable dynamic. You get that good grade, you feel good. You get that bad grade, you feel like crap. So it's no wonder why, so many people feel such an unstable sense of identity. Because it was just largely based off of minute to minute what we were doing. And I think as a lot of people, it has to do with a lot of people's struggle. But I think having people to understand that what we're doing in our jobs and our grades and our careers are things that we experience, but not the full measurement of who we are as a person will help. In other words, to separate the being from the doing is helpful because all these are temporary. And at the end of the day, you can't take all these things with you. You just can't. And there are people who have every accolade in the book who are completely miserable, and people who have no accolades whatsoever, and they feel completely fulfilled and accomplished. So, all this stuff was a big myth and a big lie that we were taught in culture in our own cultures many times.
Yeah.
And that's what causes those midlife crises. We followed the script of what they were doing, and it constantly leads to unfulfillment and, just unhappiness for so many people.
Yes. No. Well, yeah. You also say in your book actually that our purpose in this life actually is to cultivate divine virtues and to embody unconditional love, or to recreate sort of heaven on earth. And I suppose when we fulfill that purpose, or we do sort of things that fulfill that purpose, that we do feel in alignment. But when we don't, we're stuck in a toxic environment, at work or so. That's really, I think,
Right.
it gets very sort of difficult for many people, sort of
Yeah.
emotionally, psychologically.
Well, some people or situations are unfixables, and that as a therapist took me a long time to say. But some people would rather cause harm or damage, than to create harmony. That's just the way that they are. And maybe, who knows, that's their role on the planet, to create that darkness so that our light will shine more, to create that separation. Some people, they have their own roles. And for us, it could be teachings of what not to do. You could think of that parent or that spouse that we had that difficult dynamic with. They could be a teacher too of for us what not to do, develop more compassion and just a different way to do it. And if you look at all the people who've contributed to society on a very large scale, they've often had the most tumultuous, situations that they've transformed from, or you call it the phoenix out of the ashes. And they wouldn't be who they are many times without going through those things. So I think what's important is, as empaths, to not always be people pleasers and to learn to say no and to accept the things that we can influence and the things that we can't, because we're always trying to fix everything and everyone. But some people just can't be fixed or don't want to be fixed, and that's just their path, and it's not our job to do it. Their suffering goes far beyond our own lives and our own control. We can only give them the power to decide, the power to choose what they want to do with that. That's really on the person, but we can't take responsibility, for the dysfunction on situations. But in toxic jobs, yes, it's very important, to protect ourselves, and also to not take things personally. Someone else's misery shouldn't be our own. And I
Yeah.
think it's learning how to shield ourselves from someone else's stuff and learning, quite frankly, how to stand up to that,
Yeah.
you know.
There's this sort of quote that I took from your book that I love so much. You say that part of independence in our lives is a dependency on that light to which we're always connected. This leaves us without an emotional and this leaves us without an emotional and energetic need from others when
Mm-hmm.
they don't know how to treat us.
Mm-hmm.
And so, speaking here slightly from I mean, well, not slightly, speaking here really from my own experience, because I've in the past found myself in these unhealthy relationship dynamics where literally the person would sort of tell me, oh, you're codependent. And now it's not consciously that I wanted to be dependent on them, but um, the thing is that for me at least, and I'm not a religious person, but I'm a spiritual person, and this is a concept that you'll find in Christian mysticism and also in Sufism, is this idea that actually true autonomy, true independence is actually our reliance on God or on source or and I think this is the most empowering teaching actually, because if you know that God is your source, then you know that every person, place, or thing is only a channel. So it's all right if it falls away, because you know that God is your source. You see this a lot again, sort of in work environments, sort of employees who laugh excessively at their boss's jokes.
Mm-hmm.
Whilst the joke might not have been funny at all, but so we don't know that God is your source, and you make of your boss, say, your source. Then you contort yourself, and you become this inauthentic version of yourself, actually. And yeah, I think we'd have healthier relationships just in general, be it sort of work relationships or, sort of love relationships too, if we knew that sort of it's really God is really our source and not a person, place, or thing.
Right. God is not the power over ourselves. God is the power within. That makes sense. So many times we look at like someone on the high tower as God, stuff like that. And that's the construct of a world where you climb the ladder and that's on top of it. But to me, God is not the power over us. God is the power within. And the more that you're able to tap into that, the more that you don't need to search thousands of miles away to find God. You can, the more that you just open up your own doorways to your backyard and unleash the power within. And that happened to me in my NDE at just a young age. It was just a a remembrance and understanding, of the door within was when the heart was in the heart of us. And that's something that Jesus taught, itself, that the kingdom of heaven is within, right? And it's not in another person. It can't be found in another person, but it starts with you, and then from tapping it into you, you could be able to see it, in other things.
Yeah. Yes, Jake, I mean, I'm so grateful that you took this time to answer all my questions. I, is there perhaps still sort of a pearl of wisdom? I mean, there are so many in your books that you'd like to perhaps share with viewers, those who are spiritual seekers and who seek answers to life's questions.
Hmm. Yeah, there's a lot, and hopefully down the road we could do other subsequent interviews to include more. But I think as a society, especially now, we try to shy away from pain. We try to just avoid it at all costs. But I found, being friends with pain and listening to pain could be a great gateway and opener, of our lives, and it could be a shake-up period. I think what's important is to listen, and see the light behind the dark, and see the light through the dark. That's very important. My NDE really told me that, going through pain, you could be able on the other side of it to find meaning and beauty and purpose, in all things, including pain. And once you're able to do that, you don't, fear as much. So I think when people have conditions, it's not that anxiety is a problem, depression is a problem. A breakup is a problem. It's that we get depressed because we're depressed. We get anxious because we're anxious. We feel like crap because it's so. I think what's more important is how we view the particular situation and how much compassion we have to ourselves in those painful moments, not so much the experience itself.
Yeah, that's in hindsight, you can always see sort of how a difficult situation helped you grow, evolve, and ultimately help you become the person you were always meant to be. But when you're in the midst of it,
In the midst of it, we just have to, those things could be reminders of how much we have inside of us and tapping into it. Because we think about it, we're at cruise control, we're not, tapping in, we're not doing anything differently. Most people throughout their lives, they learn very little. But I think through those moments, we can remind ourselves that life is not happening to us and for us, and that, pain is not just random, that there's something to this, that there's a guiding
Mm,
force beyond the surface. So I think when people see life as charted and guided, they're able to trust in that pain and they're able to trust in a voice within to transcend those moments
mm,
versus having those moments overtake themselves and just contribute to more misery.
yeah. Learning to trust the voice within. I think
Yeah, that's a big one.
that's yeah, exactly. Yeah. How do we? Perhaps the last question. Sort of how do we learn to trust that voice
You have
within?
to have courage, right? We have to have courage. Sometimes we associate superheroes with, movie characters and stuff like that, but that hero that we're looking at, we should point out and say, that's me, right? The
Mm,
person that we like, we say, that's me, because what we love, what we see, the beauty that we see is really reflective of what we have inside of us, you
mm,
know? So that is a part of ourselves. So I think what's important is to stop seeing that very small part of ourselves and to see ourselves for who we really are.
mm,
And most people's senses of who they are is very limited and very small. And so we'll live life very small because it's very fear-based and it's very
mm.
unreflective of who we are. Most of us are more courageous when we're kids usually.
Yeah.
When something's bothering us, we'll speak up to our parents and we'll have that
Yeah.
voice, and we have to find that kid again. We have to find that voice again just to speak up to stuff,
Yeah.
and to find that voice.
Yeah.
Not
I think.
overthink things so much. Yeah.
Sorry, no, I was just going to say we also don't care so much about what other people think when we're
No, no.
when we're a child. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much, Jake. Thank you so much. You've poured your life force energy into this. Thank you. I'm grateful you've had your ND.
Right. 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 Well, to preface also, NDE has a term death, right? But I'd say, Raymond Moody coined the term as a friend of mine, near-death experience, and even he will tell you it has very little to do with death. It's what I refer to as an ELE, as an eternal life experience. And
Mm,
you don't have to have an NDE to have that. You could just tap in, to that, quiet voice within or that sacred silence, and you could really tap into, the eternal life experiences and the remembrance of our true home versus the ones that we're visiting.
oh, yeah, that's beautiful.